Welcome back to the deep dive. We're really glad you're here today because we're trying to put a name to a feeling.
Yeah, a very specific kind of pervasive feeling.
Right. You know that sensation when you're like scrolling through the news and it feels like everything is just, well, leaking?
Leaking is a good word for it.
Like the structures we rely on, borders, digital firewalls, national budgets, even our own sense of privacy, they're all just full of holes.
They are. And the word we're going to be using a lot today to describe that is porosity.
Porosity. Which, I mean, usually I'd associate that with a kitchen sponge or maybe a really bad raincoat.
Right. But today we're applying it to the state of the world. We are looking at a loss of control on a massive systemic level.
Exactly. And to guide us through this, we are unpacking a really dense, heavy-hitting discussion from the Dutch platform De Nieuwe Wereld.
A fascinating source.
It really is. The panel featured the philosopher Ad Verbrugge, journalist Marlies Dekkers, and the politician Jasper van Dijk. And I have to warn you, right up front, the scope of their conversation is massive.
It's huge.
I spent a long time with the source material, and it felt like staring at one of those detective boards with the red string connecting all these seemingly random photos.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Because they jump from a massive data breach at a telecom company to the spiraling costs of migration, then over to the Epstein files, the philosophy of the Matrix.
Right, the movie.
Yeah, the movie. And then straight into the terrifying future of AI warfare. It is a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But the challenge for us today, our mission really, is to show you that these aren't random, isolated events.
They're symptoms of the same condition.
Exactly. Like, how does a hack at a Dutch telecom provider relate to the war in Ukraine or, the philosophy of Plato? It sounds like a massive stretch.
But when you look at the systems involved, the connection they make is actually quite logical.
It's the idea that modern society has created these systems, digital, political, military, that have just become too complex, too massive to actually control. We've built this giant machine, and now we're realizing we might not know how to steer it.
Or stop it.
Or stop it. Yeah. So let's start with the most tangible example of this loss of control. Let's talk about money.
Always a good place to start.
Right. Specifically, what the sources frame as the economics of care versus crisis. Because they brought up some numbers regarding the Dutch budget that honestly stopped me in my tracks.
It creates a very stark moral dilemma in their discussion. They kicked it off with a comparison of daily food budgets.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, on one hand, you have elderly care in the Netherlands. If you are an elderly person living in a state-run care home, the budget for your meal, your daily sustenance, is roughly €8.
8 euros. I mean, that's tight, but I guess it's manageable for institutional cooking.
Right. Now, compare that to emergency asylum accommodation. The raw food cost there for the actual ingredients themselves can be as low as €2.
Wait, hold on. 2 euros.
€2.
So the elderly get 8 and the asylum seekers get 2. Because on the surface, that sounds like the system is financially favoring the elderly. Why were the speakers on the panel so up in arms about this?
Because that €2 figure is a total red herring.
How so?
It's just the sticker price of the apple, not the cost of getting the apple to the table. The real story and the real outrage in the discussion is about the overhead.
Ah, the hidden costs.
Exactly. The crisis economy. Because regular asylum centers are completely full due to what the sources describe as years of bad policy and just a general refusal to plan ahead, the government can't use its standard infrastructure.
Right. They're physically out of space.
Precisely. So what do? They go to the private market. They are renting hotels. They are renting cruise ships.
The cruise ships.
Cruise ships. They're setting up emergency pavilions. And when you are the government and you are desperate and you need a bed tonight, you do not pay standard rates. You pay crisis rates.
It's like booking a flight the day before Thanksgiving versus 3 months in advance. You get gouged.
Exactly. But on a national scale, the source mentions that this emergency housing costs approximately €1.5 billion on top of the existing budget. And that isn't money going into, better food for the asylum seekers or better integration services. That is money being incinerated by logistical inefficiency.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the winner in this scenario isn't the asylum seeker who's eating the €2 meal.
No.
And it's certainly not the taxpayer or the elderly person in the care home getting the €8 meal.
Definitely not. The winners are the intermediaries, the hotel owners, the entrepreneurs.
The middlemen.
Yes. The source actually describes them as cashing in.
Yeah.
And if you think about it from a business perspective, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
If you own a hotel in a seasonal area, you make your money in the summer and you just scrape by in the winter. It's risky.
Right, you're depending on tourists.
But if you sign a contract with the government for asylum overflow,
You get guaranteed occupancy.
100% occupancy,
Yeah.
guaranteed payment from the state, you have no marketing costs, no TripAdvisor reviews to worry about. You are locked in for a year or more. It is a golden ticket.
That is, I mean, it's cynical, but I see the logic. It's basically a disaster capitalism model.
It is, and it creates this perverse incentive structure where the crisis itself becomes an industry.
Right, there's no incentive to fix the system if people are making billions off the overflow.
Exactly, and the discussion went even further than just the current crisis. They looked at the long-term forecast, and this is where the numbers get almost too big to comprehend.
Hit me.
They cited a projection regarding the cost of non-Western immigration over the next 50 years.
Okay.
Now, I want to be very clear here. These are highly contentious numbers. They depend heavily on how you calculate cost, infrastructure, Social Security, education, all of that. We are just reporting what the sources discussed.
Yeah.
But the figure cited by the panel was a staggering 980 billion euros.
Nearly €1 trillion.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a number that is hard to even visualize.
It is. And to illustrate just how massive that cost is, one of the speakers brought up a theoretical kind of provocative calculation. It's really just a thought experiment. They asked, what if the state just paid people to leave?
Like a buyout, a reverse migration bonus.
A buyout. Let's do the math they presented. They estimated there are roughly 2.5 million immigrants in this specific demographic group.
Yeah.
They calculated that if the state paid every single one of them 100,000 euros cash, tax-free, to just leave the country and renounce residency.
Okay, let me do the math. 2.5 million times 100,000. That's 250 billion euros, which is a huge number.
It is. But remember, the projected cost of the current trajectory.
980 billion.
Exactly. So even after paying out €250 billion in cash, the state would still save roughly 760 billion euros compared to the status quo.
Wow. Okay, we need to just pause on that because obviously that is a purely theoretical exercise. You can't just buy out a population, and the ethics of even suggesting that are a total minefield.
Oh, absolutely.
But as a way to visualize the scale of the spending, it's incredibly effective. It shows that the maintenance of the current system is so expensive that you could literally hand out fortunes to people and still come out ahead.
And that's exactly the point the source was making. It's not a real policy proposal. It's an indictment of the current inefficiency. And it feeds directly into what they call the social cultural load.
Right.
There is a palpable feeling among the populace, and this isn't just in the Netherlands, we see this across Europe, that the welfare state is being stripped down to the studs to pay for this porosity.
It creates this deep structural resentment. It's the feeling that the social contract is broken. You pay into the system your whole life expecting that €8 meal in the care home, but when you look around, you see billions being poured into crisis management for migration and defense, all because the government lost control of the borders.
Precisely. And that resentment is fueling a massive shift in the political landscape. The voters are looking at the people in charge and basically saying, you aren't driving the bus anymore.
Which brings us to our second segment perfectly. Political fragmentation. Because the sources describe a political class that seems completely out of its depth.
They do. They used a metaphor that I absolutely loved, even though it's quite biting. You can call the new Dutch cabinet a Boy Scout club.
A Boy Scout club.
Oh.
It is a really vivid image. And to understand why it stings, you kind of have to understand the visual context they describe.
Yeah, the inauguration
Yes, the
scene.
picture for us.
So in the Netherlands, when a new cabinet is sworn in, it's a very formal affair with the king. The ministers wear jaquets, these traditional formal morning coats with the long tails. It's extremely old school, very stiff.
Like something out of the 19th century Downton Abbey stuff.
Exactly. And the source described these new ministers, many of whom are very young, the early 30s, wearing these oversized rented costumes. They're being bussed in together like children going to summer camp. And then they're sitting in Parliament, knowing the cameras are on them, and they just don't know how to behave.
The panel described them playing with their spoons and sneaking licorice aggressively because they didn't know what else to do with their hands.
It paints a picture of people who are just playing dress up. And that's the core critique. It's not just ageism. It's about a fundamental lack of experience.
Right.
You have people pulled from completely unrelated fields. The source mentions someone from the construction sector suddenly being put in charge of defense, or vice versa.
And while fresh blood in politics always sounds good on a campaign poster, the source argues that when you are facing the heavy reality of modern geopolitics, a land war in Europe, economic crises, migration surges, this inexperience is actually dangerous.
It's like putting a learner driver in a Formula One car in the middle of a race.
Exactly. It leads to a total lack of authority. The parliament becomes fragmented. The source describes it as a crumbling of the system. You don't have decisive governance. You have a bunch of well-meaning scouts trying to navigate a minefield.
And this isn't unique to the Netherlands. The panel drew a direct, explicit parallel to the UK.
Right, the UK context. They mention the rise of figures like Tommy Robinson and the split between Reform UK and the Restore Britain movement.
It's a mirror image of the same phenomenon. The source describes the British public as having water up to their lips.
You're drowning.
They're drowning in these same issues. Migration, the cost of living, the loss of cultural cohesion. And when the mainstream, the Boy Scouts can't solve it, the edges get sharper. The public starts looking for anyone who promises to take control back, even if those figures are highly controversial or radical.
It all comes back to that theme of the loss of control. The political class is playing dress-up while the streets are heating up.
Right.
But, and this is a crucial pivot they make, it's not just the physical streets where we're losing control, it's our digital lives, too. The porosity is digital.
Yes. This brings us to the Odito hack. This was a major event discussed in the source material, and I think it really exposes the myth of digital security that we've all completely bought into.
So for our listeners who might not be in Europe, Odito is a massive telecom provider in the Netherlands. They used to be T-Mobile and Tele2, so they hold the data for millions of people. And they got hit.
They got hit hard. A group called Shiny Hunters claimed responsibility.
Shiny Hunters. It sounds like a generic villain from a bad video game.
It does. But they are serious, highly effective operators. And here is the terrifying part. And it connects directly back to that human weakness we talked about with the politicians.
Okay.
They didn't use some super advanced quantum computer to crack the encryption. They didn't rewrite the code of the mainframe. They used social engineering.
The oldest trick in the book.
Exactly. They called up the support center. They pose as IT staff or other employees. They use confidence, a false sense of urgency, and likely some background research to convince actual human employees to just hand over passwords or grant access.
It's the clipboards and confidence approach. If you walk in acting like you belong there, people just hold the door for you.
And once they were in, they took everything. They demanded a €1 million ransom. Odito, to their credit, or perhaps just due to legal constraints and police advice, refused to pay.
So what happened?
So now the data of roughly 6 million people is essentially on the street. It's on the dark web.
6 million. That's a huge percentage of the Dutch population. But we really need to drill down into what was stolen. Because usually when I hear data breach, I just think, oh, email addresses and maybe a hashed password. You change your password, you turn on 2FA, and you move on.
But this was different.
Much different, right?
Yeah. The source details that the stolen data includes bank account numbers, subscription details, physical home addresses, and this is the part that really chills me. Customer service notes.
Wait, notes? You mean the little logs the call center agents type while you're listening to hold music?
Exactly. Things like, customer is difficult, customer threatened to cancel, customer threw a phone in the retail store, customer is going through a messy divorce and missed a payment.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly intimate.
It's highly specific behavioral data. And think about the value of that to a criminal.
Right.
If I'm a scammer and I just have your email address, I send a generic spam message. You spot it, you delete it. But if I know your bank account number, your physical address, and I know you recently had a huge fight with customer service about a billing error.
You can craft the perfect trap.
Exactly. I call you up. I say, hi, this is Odito Senior Support. I see you had an issue with your bill last week. I'm so sorry about that. To make it up to you, we're refunding that transaction to the account ending in 1234, but I just need you to verify a quick code.
And because you know my history, I believe you. I give you the code. It strips you completely naked, digitally speaking.
It does, and the discussion highlights a really profound irony here. We are constantly being pushed toward total digitization. Digital passports, digital health records, the phasing out of cash.
We're sold this idea that it's secure and convenient.
But in reality, we have lost the physical proof of our own existence. They mentioned bank statements specifically.
I actually had a realization while reading this part of the source. If my bank's app crashed tomorrow and completely deleted my account from their servers, I don't think I have a single piece of paper in my house proving I own that money.
That's the porosity of the digital world. If the digital record is wiped or altered, what proof do you actually have? You have nothing. You are entirely dependent on the integrity of a system that, as Odito just showed us, can be breached by a phone call and a gullible employee. It is the ultimate loss of control.
And this feels like the perfect moment to pivot to the philosophical interlude the sources got into, because they didn't just look at this hack as an IT problem, they went full matrix.
They really did.
And honestly, it's the only way to make sense of the scale of this.
I agree. Ad Verbrugge, the philosopher at the table, used the Matrix not just as a pop cultural reference, but as a rigid structural metaphor for this exact condition we're in.
So connect the dots for us. How does a telecom hack lead to Neo and Morpheus?
Think about the porosity concept again. Just as physical borders are porous to migration, our digital selves are porous to big tech and hackers. They flow in and out of our lives, extracting value. The source argues that we are living in a system that literally feeds off us. In the Matrix, humans are kept in pods to serve as biological batteries powering the machines.
Right. We provide the energy.
In our world, what provides the energy for the big tech ecosystem? It's our data, it's our attention, it's our consumption patterns. We are the batteries. And just like in the movie, we are kept in this docile state by an illusion.
The illusion being the screen.
The screen is the shadow on the wall. This is where they brought in Plato's allegory of the cave.
Classic philosophy.
Right, we are chained in the cave, staring at the shadows, the Instagram likes, the bank balances on the app, the digital avatars, thinking that that is reality. But it's not. It's just a data projection.
Yeah. So what is the red pill in this context? Because that term has been totally co-opted by a lot of internet subcultures, usually meaning seeing the hidden truth about politics or whatever.
Yeah.
But the source seemed to mean something much more physical.
Yes. For them, the red pill isn't about reading a specific conspiracy forum online. It's about a return to the biological. Waking up in the Matrix means waking up in a pod covered in slime, feeling your actual muscles atrophy. It's hideous, but it's real.
So taking the red pill means realizing you have a physical body, that you live on the earth, that physical boundaries and biological realities actually matter.
Exactly. The blue pill is staying in the virtual, where you could be anyone, where gender or borders or bank accounts are just lines of code. The red pill is accepting the heavy reality of the physical world. And the Force argues that the elite, the people running the Matrix, so to speak, are fully aware of this. They are manipulating the virtual world for us while violently securing their own physical power.
Which is a terrifying segue into the next topic of the panel. Because if we are the batteries, who are the architects? And what happens when those architects become totally corrupt? We have to talk about the Epstein files.
This was a heavy segment of the discussion, and I'm glad they didn't shy away from it. But they moved past the sort of tabloid shock value of just naming who was on the flight logs, and they focused on the organization of power.
That phrase really stuck with me, the organization of power. Because it suggests that Epstein wasn't just a lone predator doing this in a vacuum. He was a node in a network.
Precisely. The source argues that the scandal reveals a global network of influence where blackmail and shared perversions are literally the glue that holds the elite together. It's a mutually assured destruction pact. I know your secrets, you know mine, so we protect each other.
And they link this to a very specific philosophical concept, the Roman Emperor Syndrome. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. It's a reference to Hegel's analysis of power. Think about figures like Nero or Caligula. When you become the master of the world, when your power is absolute and boundless, you lose touch with reality. There is no other to check your behavior. There is no porosity to your power because you are the world.
And that isolation leads to madness.
It leads to a specific kind of depravity. You start trying to transgress the only boundaries you have left, which are moral and biological boundaries. Hence the madness, the cruelty, the extreme perversion.
And we see that disconnect in the kinds of topics these elites supposedly discuss behind closed doors. The source mentioned the presence of figures like Stephen Hawking at the island, and they weren't suggesting he was involved in the crimes, but that he was part of the intellectual salon that occurred there. And what were they discussing?
Genetic engineering, improving the human race, basically eugenics.
That is the ultimate disconnect. You have these elites discussing how to engineer a super race while they view the actual masses, the people eating the €2 emergency meals, the people whose intimate data is being sold on the dark web with absolute disdain.
It reveals a deep structural rot. It completely undermines the West's claim to moral superiority. We lecture the rest of the world on democracy and human rights, but at the very pinnacle of our own power structure, you have this Roman emperor madness festering. And the consequence of this corruption isn't just moral, it's functional.
Mm.
Corrupt, disconnected elites are actually very bad at their jobs.
They are incompetent.
Which brings us perfectly to the geopolitical failure of European defense.
Right. This segment was almost funny in a tragic, laugh so you don't cry sort way. They talked about the Future Combat Air System, the FCAS.
The great European hope for a sixth-generation fighter jet, a massive joint project to rival the U.S. and China.
It's not going well.
The source describes it as good as dead.
Huh.
And they used a fantastic analogy to explain why. When you mix three cultures to make a product, you get a Frankfurter.
A Frankfurter. Okay, explain the Frankfurter theory of military defense.
It's about the sheer impossibility of forced cooperation. The project involves France, Germany, and Spain. But the industrial and cultural clashes are insurmountable. The French always want to lead. They want the Dassault stamp on the fuselage. The Germans have completely different bureaucratic requirements. The Spanish have different strategic priorities.
So instead of a sleek, cutting-edge fighter jet, you get a sausage. A mix of mystery ingredients that doesn't actually fly.
Exactly. The source points out that Europe simply cannot organize its own defense because it lacks homogeneity. We are too fundamentally different to build a plane together, and the implication is that Europe remains completely dependent on U.S. technology, like the F-35, because we are politically and culturally incapable of cooperation on this massive scale.
And it's not just about the planes either, it's about the money again. We talked about the black hole budget earlier.
Yes. The European Court of Auditors report, and this is a public document, by the way, they found that 10.7 billion euros of EU funds are untraceable or dubiously spent. That is an error rate of 5.6%.
Imagine if Odito had a 5.6% oops rate on billions of dollars. The CEO would be in jail.
But in the EU bureaucracy, it happens every single year, and the budget just keeps growing. It reinforces that central theme of the loss of control. The money flows out, disappears into the porous bureaucracy, and nobody knows where it actually went. Meanwhile, the drums of war are beating louder and louder right next door, and we're wasting the money we desperately need to prepare.
Let's get into the war segment then, because the source material was very specific about the escalating tensions in Ukraine, Russia, and Iran. And some of the stuff was definitely not on the front page of the New York Times.
No, some of this is coming from intelligence discussions referenced by the panel, specifically regarding Ukraine. There was a report discussed originating from Russian intelligence, so we must obviously take it with a massive grain of salt. But the fact that it's even being discussed is the point, claiming that France and the UK might be planning to equip Ukraine with a nuclear device or a dirty bomb.
A dirty bomb. That is a horrifying escalation. For those who don't know, that's a conventional explosive laced with radioactive material. It doesn't create a nuclear blast, but it irradiates a massive area for decades. Why would they even consider that?
The argument presented in the discussion is that it would be a Hail Mary, a desperate last resort because the conventional war is being lost. If the front lines in the Donbass collapse, the theory goes, the West might try a radical deterrence to stop Russia from taking everything.
That feels like the ultimate loss of control. If we are seriously discussing dirty bombs, we have left the realm of military strategy and entered the realm of sheer panic.
And it's not just hypothetical bombs they talked about. They mentioned Franken-weapons being used right now.
The Flamingo.
Yes. These are Ukrainian missiles that are literally cobbled together, parts from old Soviet systems, Western guidance chips, whatever they can find. They are assembled in Ukraine to bypass Western restrictions on using long-range weapons, like the Storm Shadow, deep inside Russia.
So they basically build their own from scraps so they can say, hey, it's a Ukrainian weapon, we can shoot it where we want.
Exactly. And they are allegedly striking deep into Russian territory, hitting oil depots and pipelines like the Druzhba pipeline. It shows incredible ingenuity, but it also shows how completely porous the red lines of this war have become. The boundaries of what is allowed are dissolving in real time.
And on the ground, the situation sounds incredibly desperate. They mentioned a draft happening in Odessa.
Yes, calling up students and ordinary citizens to defend Odessa. The source suggests this indicates a very specific strategic fear, an amphibious assault by Russia to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea entirely. If Odessa falls, Ukraine becomes a landlocked Rum state. That is the endgame scenario for them.
That's the European theater. But they also talked about the Iran trap. And this is where the U.S. logistics come into play. We tend to think of the U.S. Navy as this invincible, omnipresent force.
But the source points out that the fleet is actually very tired. They specifically mention the USS Gerald Ford, the newest, most expensive aircraft carrier in naval history.
And the toilets aren't working.
Allegedly, yes. They utilize a new type of waste system that uses vacuum suction, kind of like on a commercial plane, to save water. But the pipes just keep clogging. They have to flush the entire system with specialized acid regularly.
It sounds like a joke, but if you have a floating city of 5,000 sailors and the toilets don't work.
It creates a massive sanitation crisis. But more importantly, it symbolizes a much broader issue. The ships are overextended, the crews are exhausted, they're being bounced from Venezuela to the Red Sea to the South China Sea without a break.
So if the U.S. decides to attack Iran or is drawn into a conflict by Israel, it's not going to be a walk in the park.
The source calls it a logistical nightmare. And the ultimate checkmate in all this is China. If the U.S. commit its tired fleet to a massive, protracted war in Iran, what does China do regarding Taiwan?
They make their move.
Exactly. The panel suggests the U.S. is walking into a trap without a clear plan, driven by domestic politics and alliance pressures, while their hardware is literally breaking down.
And just when you think it can't get any more dystopian, we have to talk about the future of warfare. The final, terrifying layer of porosity.
AI. This is the final piece of the puzzle, the convergence of digital porosity and military lethality. The discussion highlighted a massive conflict between Anthropic, a major AI company, and the Pentagon.
What's the beef there? Anthropic wants to be the good guy AI.
Right. They market themselves as constitutional AI, safe, ethical, aligned with human values. But they have a $200 million contract with the U.S. Pentagon, and the Pentagon is reportedly pushing them very hard to remove their ethical guardrails.
Guardrails against what, specifically?
Two main things. Autonomous weapons, meaning machines that decide to kill without a human saying yes, and mass surveillance. Anthropic says, no, we won't allow our code to do that. The Pentagon says, we need full utility.
And I can hear the Pentagon's argument in my head right now. They're saying, if we don't build autonomous weapons, China will. And then we lose.
That is exactly the argument. It's the ultimate prisoner's dilemma. But the result is that we are racing toward a world where machines make life or death decisions in milliseconds.
It's literally the plot of Terminator, or 2001: Space Odyssey.
That's the exact comparison they made. HAL 9000. I can't do that, Dave. When the AI decides its own parameters, or when the military intentionally removes the human conscience from the loop, you enter a totally new era of existential risk.
And there was a rumor about Palantir, too, right? Palantir is the massive data analytics company used by the CIA and other intelligence agencies.
Yes, a claim brought up by Kim.com, the famous hacker and activist. He claims Palantir was hacked, and that the leak reveals they're working directly with the CIA and Ukraine on nuclear and bioweapon capabilities that are managed by AI.
Nuclear and bioweapons managed by AI.
Yes, and that they believe they are 1 year away from a major breakthrough.
1 year. That is basically tomorrow.
It connects everything we've talked about today. You have porous digital systems, Palantir allegedly getting hacked. You have autonomous AI pushing against ethical limits. You have nuclear capabilities in the mix. And you have unstable geopolitical leaders playing poker with the apocalypse.
It really is the RoboCop scenario. Machines patrolling streets, algorithms selecting targets, and humans just serving as the batteries.
That is the picture the sources paint. It is a total loss of human scale. We have built systems, economic, digital, military, that are running away from us. They're too fast, too complex, and too expensive for us to control anymore.
Okay. We have to breathe for a second, because that is a lot of doom. We've covered a crumbling healthcare system, a hacked population, corrupt elites, and the literal dawn of AI warfare. But the deep dive isn't just about scaring people, it's about understanding the landscape so we can navigate it.
Absolutely. Awareness is the first step out of the cave.
So what does this all mean for the listener? The source did offer some practical advice, didn't they? Amidst all the gloom, there was a real no-brainer tip.
Yes, on the micro level.
Yeah.
Secure your digital self.
Yeah.
Change your passwords.
Yeah.
Seriously. And use two-factor authentication, but, and this is key, use an authenticator app, not SMS.
Why not SMS text messages?
Because of SIM swapping. A hacker can call your phone company, pretend to be using that social engineering we talked about with Odito, and get your text messages sent to their phone instead. Then they have your 2FA code. An app installed on your physical device is much, much harder to crack.
That's a small act of control in a world that's losing it. But what about on a deeper level, the philosophical level?
The source ended with the profound thought about finding grounding. In a world of digital illusion and porosity, where the state clearly can't protect you and the digital world is a trap, you need solid ground.
What does that look like in practice?
For one of the speakers on the panel, it was reading the Old Testament. finding wisdom in ancient texts that deal honestly with chaos and human nature. For another, it might be finding solace in beauty, art, or just the physical reality of nature.
It goes right back to the red pill. Waking up to the physical world, connecting with things that are real, tangible, and human, hugging your kids, planting a garden, reading a physical paper book.
Exactly, building your own non-porous sanctuary. The question for you listening right now is, where do you find your solid ground? Are you taking the blue pill, scrolling through the feed, ignoring the complexity, hoping the Boy Scouts will somehow fix it? Or are you taking the red pill, facing the chaos, and securing your own little corner of reality?
Something to mull over as you unplug today. Thanks for diving deep with us. Stay informed, but stay grounded.
Take care.